USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Learn more and get a quote at USAA.com/bundle. Restrictions apply.
Hilton brings you new ways to stay. With experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
Always look to the sky. The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Music Radio 77 WABC transforms itself magically to the Dr. Sky Experience with our new expanded hours, midnight Saturday to 2 a.m. Sunday, Eastern Daylight Time, in addition to our regular program that I'm sure you've been listening to, and we do appreciate the commentary, Friday midnight to 2 a.m. Saturday morning, Eastern Daylight Time. As we welcome you once again to your weekend, great conversations with you, the callers, and great guests. And particularly these 2 hours that we share with you as we move through time and space, talking with you about the great realms of astronomy, space, aviation, and weather. And we always encourage our callers to jump in early and get in the queue. That number, 1-800-848-9222. That's 1-800-848-9222, which simply stands for, of course, WABC. If you'd like to email me, it's simple, Dr. Sky, DRSKY, at WABCRadio.com. And if you happen to meet people and tell them about this particular show, we appreciate it, and they'd like to listen to it, you can listen to it into infinity if you go to the Dr. Sky Experience podcast, available at WABCRadio.com and Red Apple Audio Networks, of course. And we appreciate our producer, Bill, who is our helmsman now as we navigate through time and space with this powerhouse starship, simply WABC. You know, ladies and gentlemen, we were talking about over this particular weekend, if you missed our show, about some of the things that are happening naturally in space, as Friday was National Space Day. But before we begin, birthday wishes to Diana and Aurora, the 2 most important females in my life, who, by the way, never miss a show. What can you expect here on this particular series of 2 hours as we go into time and space? In our first hour, we'll be introducing who's no stranger to this particular radio show, is actually our very first guest here on Talk Radio 77 WABC, Robert Godwin, who's the owner and publisher at cgpublishing.com. This gentleman, in my opinion, is a polymath who understands so much about the world of space, as we talk with him in just a few moments about all the things that are happening in space from the Apollo program, even before that, and the great stories of what's happening in space right now today, as we talk about Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and their great efforts in the corporate side, the privatized side of space, and so much more. And in hour 2, another repeat guest, ladies and gentlemen, by your, of course, request. And then we'll be talking to our very special expert on bird migration, Dr. Andrew Farnsworth. Did you know that according to many in the know, as far as those that are ornithologists, bird watchers included, not necessarily having degrees in the study of ornithology, there's been incredible migrations of birds across North America, and you may wonder why. So if you go out into the areas in the early evening or in the morning and see literally hundreds, if not thousands of birds flying north, our special guest on hour number 2 will talk with us about this great stuff. And also, from time to time, which is every time, we'll give you an update on what you can actually see, as we call it, the live sky, all across the wide region that this radio station reaches. As they say, 173 countries, all 50 states, here in Arizona, from the deserts all the way to New York, to the massive skyscrapers, and to you, wherever you're listening or calling us. 1-800-848-9222. So let's begin with our repeat guest, by popular demand also. Robert Godwin was born in England in 1958. He was educated at St. Oswald's College in Shropshire in England, and then, of course, moved on to a very illustrious career. We could do shows with him on his studies in the rock music world. In 1975, Robert attended, get a load of this, a Led Zeppelin concert, appearance in London, which began a lifelong obsession with the band and their music. And in the same year, he briefly worked as a member of the road crew for the rock band Scorpions. Lots to talk about. But the main content of this hour is to introduce our guest. Robert, good morning, as we talk with you through the airwaves of WABC in Canada. How are you?
Good morning, Steve. Thank you for having me back.
Well, it's always a privilege and honor, sir, to talk, that is, about these great subjects that you have written, and with co-authors, so many wonderful books here. So in this particular hour, something we never got a chance to talk about because of the time that is so short. Here's a book in my hand, and I'm just a big fan. You know much more about it. 2001. Stanley Kubrick's epic movie. This is so fascinating. The integral parts of this movie, how it got to be put together, and why by many they consider it to be one of the most epic of all of the movies of science fiction. What say you about that as we get into the book 2001, The Heritage and Legacy of the Space Odyssey?
Well, I'm inclined to think it's the best movie ever made, but I'm biased, I think.
I certainly understand after reading these books that you put out. I mean, who wouldn't get hooked on this story?
I first saw it the year it came out, and like many other people, didn't really understand the ending, so promptly ran straight out to the local bookshop and bought Arthur C. Clarke's novel, which explained it a lot better. And of course, that was because Arthur and Stanley Kubrick had worked in parallel, one working on the film, one working on the story. And then they would get together at various intervals and sort of compare notes. And Arthur got quite frustrated at one point because he was constantly having to redraft and tear up the story and change it. And in the end, they decided that, the book would be credited to Arthur and the movie would be credited to Stanley. And the two don't really run in parallel completely. So, if you don't understand the end of the movie, I do recommend reading Arthur's book.
I think you're 100% right, and I know people, friends of mine, I do a lot of presentations at schools and all the way up to senior, individuals and communities, and they scratch their head and they say, what the heck is the meaning of that ending of that movie? Like myself, in 1968, against my parents' wishes, I actually got to a theater in Montclair, New Jersey when we lived there, and I don't want to use the word snuck into the theater, we paid, but I was just like at the edge of my seat because honestly, and there's nothing else but honest in this guy's voice, it was like the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Look at the future of what it predicted. And to fast forward with you, Robert, this is interesting. The whole concept of artificial intelligence, how many people really recognized back then that this whole HAL 9000, computer was even more advanced than we may even have today in some ways? What say you?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think I mentioned to you before, Steve, that one of my friends and co-author was Frederick Ordway, who was Stanley's technical advisor on the movie. And most of what you see in the technology of that film was put on the screen by Fred Ordway. And Fred worked with a guy called Roger McGowan, who was the head of the U.S. Army's Artificial Intelligence Division in the early 60s. And Fred and Roger used to walk in the woods in Huntsville, Alabama, walking their dogs, speculating about both AI and ET. And so Fred had access to all of the sort of top thinking that was being done in the U.S. military at the time about what artificial intelligence might be possible. And so amazing. He was able to bring that to the table and tell Arthur Clarke about some of that information. And then, of course, around the same time, Fred and Roger McGowan wrote a book called Intelligence in the Universe, which ended up being published before 2001 came out. It was published, I think, in 1965. And he had Arthur Clarke write the foreword for it, and it covered many of these same topics. Fred also did a couple of children's books around the time. Well, they were sort of done for juveniles rather than kids, kind of teenagers. One was called Conquering the Sun's Empire, and the other was called Life in Other Solar Systems. And in those books, he speculated about AIs that would evolve to the point where they might take over an entire civilization and then deploy probes out into the universe.
How amazing. I mean, look what's going on now almost. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, which of course is what happens in the movie. That the monolith is supposed to be what was called a Bracewell probe, which was an AI sent out by an alien civilization to look for life.
Yes, that's an interesting term, Bracewell probe. We don't hear much about that. So define that a little better. It's like an artificial intelligent probe sent by another civilization, right, into space.
Yeah, there was a guy called Ron Bracewell who first postulated that in I think, the early 60s. He wrote a number of really good books. One of them was called the Galactic Club, Intelligent Life in Outer Space. And he said that, the amount of energy that would be involved in sending yourself on an interstellar journey was going to be really too difficult. And so it would make more sense to deploy drones, essentially, and send them out to prospective solar systems that might have M-class stars or whatever. And just leave them hanging there, looking to see if they could detect anything in the form of artificial, or rather intelligent life, I should say. And so in the movie, that's where that concept came from, the idea of having one buried on the moon, and they dig it up, the monolith. That comes from Bracewell, and Bracewell actually worked in the same field as Arthur Clarke. They were both radar operators during World War II, so they were familiar with each other's work.
Totally amazing. If you'd like to get another conversation, yes, the callers do rule here on the Dr. Sky Experience. If you're a big fan of science fiction, if you're curious about what we're talking about, a collection of information here from our very special guest, Robert Godwin. He, of course, is the owner, publisher, CG Publishing, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get into that, cgpublishing.com. But more important than anything I can talk about here, 2001, The Heritage and Legacy of the Space Odyssey. A very interesting book here. Robert, I had this opportunity a long time ago, and I find it fascinating that I'm even telling this. I looked in the New York white pages when I lived in New York City, proud to be there, and I found the name A. Asimov in the white pages. And I was a fan of, I hadn't read much of his books, so I dialed the number, and sure enough, I. Asimov is Isaac Asimov. So I got to talk to him for a moment, and that to me was just so incredible because I didn't know all about him that much, but now I do. But I want you to introduce Arthur C. Clarke to this audience because there's a man, if I'm correct, was the father of looking at all these different spacecraft that are in geosynchronous orbit. He was, a polymath himself, way ahead of his time.
Yeah, he sort of became anointed as the inventor of the communication satellite because he was the first to really put it down in an academic paper, the notion that if you put a satellite at 22,000 miles above the Earth, for it to stay in orbit, it would remain static in the sky, which is what we call geosynchronous orbit.
Yes.
And so you could then bounce TV and radio signals off it. In fact, Arthur didn't really figure it out first. It was, I think, first postulated by a guy called George Smith in a book called Venus Equilateral or something like that. I can't remember. It's a science fiction novel.
Okay.
Arthur credited him with first sort of coming up with the idea, but Arthur was the first to put it down as a paper, which he published just after the war. And so he used to go around wearing a T-shirt saying, I invented the communications satellite, and all I got was this lousy T-shirt. But Arthur had a wicked sense of humor.
Yeah,
and he was very good friends with Isaac Asimov. And the pair of them actually inspired me greatly as a kid. I heard Asimov do a lecture to the Mensa Society in England in 1975, and Arthur introduced him. And I have to say, it was absolutely hilarious, really very funny. They're both funny guys.
Way before TED Talks, I guess, right? There you go.
Yeah.
Very interesting. As I mentioned, Robert, the callers rule here. Let's go to the beautiful Sunshine State of Florida. Let's welcome Joel. Good morning, Joel. You're on the Dr. Sky Experience with Robert Godwin, author, and also a great history of music that we'll share with you. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, gentlemen. As a graduate electrical engineer, I've been involved with Dr. Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov, and I've been reading them for many years. And I researched UFOs at the time called UFOs, now UAP. What I am curious about, we've had many, many people come into the presidency. We've had many people come and go. They've talked about UAP, but no one has really come out and given a definitive answer as to what, if any, might be the threat of a UAP civilization against us here on Earth. Is there such a thing? Is this fact or is it fake?
Yeah, this is interesting, Joel. I'm going to let Robert jump all over this because he's got a very deep knowledge of not only science fiction, but all these topics. Robert, please continue.
Good evening, Joel. Yes. Well, what seems to be the consensus of futurists is that if a society was able to build something that can actually traverse interstellar distances, that they would be so far ahead of us, we would be, much like ants to us. They would be so much more sophisticated, and would probably be capable of doing things that we couldn't even sort of detect. Of course, this has been worked to death in shows like Star Trek, with them hiding from primitive civilizations and not violating their prime directive and so forth. I think that's a bit optimistic, but there are people that are serious scientists now that are actually doing work on what could be going on with UAPs. One of them is actually a good friend of mine, an author that whose book I published. His name is Dr. Like Mirabeau, and he wrote a book about it's called the Lightcraft Technical Manual, and he's been working with high energy lasers and microwaves with the U.S. government for years and years, and came up with a technology that, for a while, NASA was considering as fourth-generation launch propulsion technology, which would use lasers or microwaves to propel things to do maneuvers similar to what people have suggested that they've seen with UAP, UFO behavior. It's fascinating stuff. I can't begin to profess that I understand the physics behind it, but
it is fascinating.
It's an amazing.
Joel, you get the last word down in the beautiful state of Florida. Are you with us?
All right. Well, I do thank you. As I said, I've researched this for many years myself. I researched it when I did my undergraduate studies, my graduate studies, and again, I would like to see if anyone, hopefully shortly, someone could come out with a definitive answer as to where we do stand. Obviously, we're talking about technology that is way superior to anything that we currently have or might have in the very near future. But I just do hope that we do get this resolved so that it does not come down to an answer. Well, we can't tell the people because the people of this world might be intimidated or frightened or whatever. I think we're beyond that. I think it's time we do know exactly what's happening with these UAPs.
Well, Joel, you're right on measure, and I know Robert and I both agree, and it's probably so many listeners across the nation and around the world. The basic question is this. We had guests on in our previous show 24 hours ago, which we're on, of course, every Friday, midnight to 2 a.m. Saturday, Eastern Daylight Time, and we posed that question. We still don't have answers. Why the heck have we never been told the truth about alien technology visiting the Earth? And, as many say, what, Joel? Alien bodies actually recovered. I don't think people would die and freak out. But then again, Joel, thanks for being part of our show, and I hope you become part of this family and call us from time to time, and do appreciate your time with us this morning. Let's now go out to the great state, the land of enchantment in New Mexico. We say good morning to Christine. Christine, you're on the air here on the Dr. Sky Experience. How are you?
Hi, Dr. Sky and Mr. Robert. I'm so glad that you're having this program tonight, and just wanted to say to your wonderful guest that 2001 is my mother and father's favorite movie of all time.
Wow.
And it's just very special that you're there this evening, and I just wish you both many blessings from the land of enchantment here in the great state of New Mexico.
Thank you, Christine. That's very kind of you.
No, Robert, we get amazing callers all the way. This is like the first one we've had from New Mexico. But, Christine, thank you for joining us, and so much as we wish you a great weekend, and hopefully you'll continue to be part of this growing family here on the Dr. Sky Experience. Thank you, and a good weekend to you.
Thank you, Dr. Sky.
This is so interesting, and I know we may not have time, and I want to kind of jump fast forward here to this. In the back of this particular book, I'm fascinated, and I won't go read each one of the lines, let people get the book, which we encourage, and we'll tell you how to do that at the end of the program. But Arthur C. Clarke, as you describe, he gets a copy of a book called Lost in First Men. Might be a catalyst, Robert, for his future writing skills, talking about this whole story. But this is interesting.
It was written by a guy called Olaf Stapledon. He was a philosopher in England in the 1930s. And Arthur was so smitten by his books that he actually took a train ride up from London up to Liverpool, where Stapledon lived, and literally went and knocked on his door and asked him if he would come and speak at the British Interplanetary Society, which he subsequently did. that book really affected Arthur profoundly, and there was another one by a guy called David Lasser called The Conquest of Space that came out around the same time. And the two books set him up for the rest of his life for his sort of philosophy. One gave him a kind of pantheistic view of the nature of reality, and the other was teaching him all about the physics and mathematics and chemistry of rocket and space travel. So they were both really important writers, and interestingly, both of them came from port cities, one from Baltimore in the United States and one from Liverpool in England.
Your book goes in, and we don't have time, of course, to go chapter by chapter, and that's why people, of course, do get books, and this one we highly recommend, if we call it a Dr. Sky bookshelf. But you go through here all the way through the history of the story of science fiction, and forgive me for not knowing the exact way to pronounce this in French, but you show this particular reproduction painting of that famous video or movie, the old-style silent movie, of this projectile hitting what looks like a chocolate cream pie or something, and it's the face of the moon. I have to laugh so hard because that's a serious attempt to go to the moon, right?
It was a movie made in 1902 by a guy called Georges Méliès. He was a famous French movie director, and it was probably the first certainly the first full motion picture of a science fiction trip to the moon. It was sort of loosely based on Jules Verne's From the Earth to the Moon and H.G. Wells' First Men in the Moon, which were separated by 30-odd years. But he kind of combined the two and created this landmark film. And it really had a huge impact. I don't know if you ever saw Tom Hanks' TV series From the Earth to the Moon.
Oh, absolutely. One of the best.
The very last episode, Hanks appears in a recreation of Méliès's film studio and plays Méliès's assistant as he shows him shooting that famous 1902 movie. It's a wonderful scene. And fairly recently, they found a color print of it in a barn in Spain, and it had been hand-tinted back in the early 1900s, probably by Méliès's own people, and released on Blu-ray. So if you want to see it in color, there is a Blu-ray print of it out there.
So you read it, ladies and gentlemen. We get these great guests all here on the Dr. Sky Experience. And, two of the greatest mysteries I can think of, who the heck was the face behind that moon? We don't know. Maybe you do. And the other great mystery, the other great mystery is even more bizarre. I had the gentleman, and I forget his name. If you watch the epic movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, Moonwatcher, the person who's in what? Do you call it an ape suit or a gorilla suit? What would be the correct way if people haven't seen the movie?
I guess it's an ape suit. The fellow in the suit was a guy called Dan Richter. Yes. And Dan was what would you call a beat poet in the early 60s and also a mime artist.
Yes. And
he was traveling around Europe in the early 60s and somehow stumbled into a meeting with Stanley Kubrick. And Kubrick said, "Can you do a miming imitation of an ape?" And Dan said, "Well, get me some towels and a tight sweater." And so they went and got him some towels, and he stuffed them into the sweater and hunched himself over and started mimicking an ape's movements. And Kubrick was completely sold, and he hired him immediately. But what people don't know is that Dan went on to become very close friends with John Lennon and Yoko Ono and actually lived with them for a while.
That is amazing.
Fascinating guy.
Yeah, we had him on our show, and like I said, if he walked into a room, that would be one of the most difficult people to have, prove it that you were the guy, and there's obviously, you'll have to take his word for it. But folks, if you have questions, we're continuing on this particular theme with our very special guest, Robert Godwin, cgpublishing.com, and we'll be talking more about that. But also, what could be more important than that? All the content in this book, there is a connection. Just before we go to the hard break at the bottom of the hour, we'll kind of tease you with this, and this is interesting. You know the story. You wrote it. Gene Roddenberry with Star Trek. This is an interesting connection that you have here because he wasn't very successful, am I correct in this, Robert, in presenting this whole concept, and it became what? One of the most iconic science fiction TV series. Briefly, what happened to Roddenberry when he got started? He wasn't well received with his whole concept.
Yeah, he was obviously the one who came up with Star Trek, and he had been sort of prompted to go out and read things like Olaf Stapledon, the same people that Clarke had read. And he wanted to do this sort of wagon train to the stars TV series, and nobody was really giving him much time. But fortunately for him, Lucille Ball, who owned a studio called Desilu, decided that she would finance the thing. But what's really interesting, and most people don't know, is that once Star Trek actually hit, Roddenberry didn't make very much money out of it, and by the time it was canceled, it was about $3 million in the red. And Roddenberry really didn't start to get any profit sharing out of that show until 1984, which was 17 years after it went off the air originally.
It's a long time, yes. That's amazing. Yeah. I never knew this. I mean, this is just great stuff that we're talking about here. And in your book, again, just in case people are joining us right now and saying, wow, this sounds pretty interesting, and why not? Because we talk about these subjects where, how do we say, we dispense from the political side of the world and talk about things that I think are otherworldly, the mysteries of the universe. Our special guest, Robert Godwin, cgpublishing.com, will talk about his company and a lot of other things that you may not know about our special guest. Also, his involvement in the music industry. That's going to blow it off the charts or out of the stratosphere, maybe out into the cosmos. The book, 2001, The Heritage and Legacy of the Space Odyssey. A very interesting book going through the history, Robert, of science fiction films, if you're a big fan, and who isn't. You know, I was scared to death of Invaders from Mars when I was a kid. I thought I was that kid, and for anybody who hasn't seen it, it's like a little boy with the open window and the breeze. And what does he see, Robert? He sees this saucer go back behind his house.
Yeah, he sees a spacecraft crash in the hills just outside his house. It's a terrifying scene. I remember watching it.
It is a terrifying scene. And I think I had a nightmare over that whole thing. And I'm sure a lot of other people in that particular era. I think it was a 1956 film, if I'm correct.
Something like that, yeah. I forget the year exactly, but I think you're close.
Totally incredible.
It was after Forbidden Planet, I know that, which was around 51, I think, or 50.
And that's a movie that people should never miss because Leslie Nielsen and Anne Francis, I mean, that is just totally out of the stratosphere.
Well, that was one of the things that inspired Star Trek. I mean, clearly Roddenberry copied a lot of the stuff from Forbidden Planet, which itself was a remake of Shakespeare, so it's a good story.
Wow. Robert Godwin, you're awesome. We call you a polymath, and obviously that definition maybe needs to just be talked about after we come back from the break. But ladies and gentlemen, we're going to the hard break at the bottom of the hour, as you know, in the broadcast world. But so much more, I should say, exciting things to come here on the other side of these announcements with the Dr. Sky Experience. Once again, your questions and comments, you go to the front of that caller line as best as we can get you if you talk about to our producer. And tell that to Bill that you are a big fan of sci-fi. 1-800-848-9222. We'll be right back.
You talk. We listen. 77 WABC.
Finding a new job is stressful. But with Indeed, it doesn't have to be. Just fill out your Indeed profile with your skills, experience, and desired salary. The more you fill out, the better your matches will be. And hearing from hiring managers will be 2 times more likely. Relax. That's your Indeed profile sending opportunities your way. Indeed, the world can work better.
The PC gave us computing power at home, the internet connected us, and mobile let us do it pretty much anywhere. Now generative AI lets us communicate with technology in our own language using our own senses. But figuring it all out when you're living through it is a totally different story. Welcome to Leading the Shift, a new podcast from Microsoft Azure. I'm your host, Susan Ettlinger. In each episode, leaders will share what they're learning to help you navigate all this change with confidence. Please join us. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Out here, there's no one way of doing things. No unwritten rules, and no shortage of adventure. Because out here, the only requirement is having fun. Bank of America invites kids 6 to 18 to golf with us. For a limited time, sign them up for a free 1-year membership, giving them access to discounted tee times at thousands of courses. Learn more at bankofamerica.com/golf with us. What would you like the power to do? Bank of America. Restrictions apply. See BofA.com/golf with us for complete details. Copyright 2025 Bank of America Corporation.
McCrispy strips are now at McDonald's. I hope you're ready for the most dippable chicken in McDonald's history. Dip it in all the sauces. Dip it in that hot sauce in your bag. Dip it in your McFlurry. Your dip is your business. McCrispy strips at McDonald's.
This is the Dr. Sky Experience. Always look to the sky. 77 WABC. Now,
recently, Hugh Downs was asked why he enjoys listening to the Dr. Sky Show.
I think the reason is simply that with the amount of time he has two things going. One is the knowledge to know science, and the second thing is the ability to get it across to people who might not quite understand it, and you get it across correctly. That's quite admirable.
And again, ladies and gentlemen, we're back here on the Dr. Sky Experience, 32 minutes after the hour. Where are we? We are here at Talk Radio 77 WABC. Your calls, of course, are very important to us. 1-800-848-9222. And in the background, as you heard, a tribute to a friend of mine for such a long time, and maybe yourselves, the great broadcaster Hugh Downs. We spent a lot of time together. He sadly passed away, living a very full life, 99 years young, just a number of years ago. What an incredible person. And I know, Robert, you know this. He was head of the National Space Society.
Yes, he was on the board of governors for the NSS. That's where I met him, actually. I'd only met him once briefly, but lovely guy.
Let's go to the callers. We welcome Mark in Arizona. Good morning, Mark. You're on the Dr. Sky Experience with Robert Godwin. How are you this morning?
Great. Thank you for another wonderful show. Dr. Godwin, here's my question for you. Could you please save me a lot of effort? I've watched this movie just recently, 2001, and I still have not completely figured it out. And I'll go to the hope that you'll be able to explain to us before we run out of time. But one thing I wanted to mention to you all before I listen to you is in June of 1968, Playboy magazine had an interview with Stanley Kubrick. You can pick this up on the internet online. It's an amazing interview. Were you aware of that?
Yes, I am familiar with it, and believe it or not, it's the only copy of Playboy I own.
Well, I had a few more than that, but that's another story.
Honestly.
My mother cut all the pictures out in my magazine. Let me just read the articles.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, it's a great interview. Mark. It's one of the most important interviews he did about the film.
Yeah. So, Mark, what did he say in there? I mean, can you tell us? Because I don't know that. And, Robert, I think both of you, tell us more about what was in there. Was there a denial of the moon landing or something? Is that where we're going?
No, it was about the making of the movie and the meaning behind the movie. And because a lot of people were getting frustrated that they didn't understand the story. And they were all pushing him and Arthur Clarke to explain it. And Arthur famously said, if you understood it, we haven't done our job properly. And Stanley had deliberately left it to be obscure. He didn't want people to know exactly what his thoughts were. In the interview, I believe it was the Playboy interview, somebody was asking him if it was supposed to be the ultimate film sort of portraying Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy of life. And Kubrick wouldn't be drawn into it so easily and give the interviewer a straight answer. He didn't want to do that. He thought it was much more compelling without the dialogue explaining it, because originally there was going to be a lot of exposition in the movie, a lot of over-talking, including even interviews with people like Isaac Asimov and Carl Sagan at the beginning, explaining what was coming in the movie. He cut all that out. And so in the interview in Playboy, particularly, and in the other few interviews that he did, he obfuscated, just did not want to. He just dodged the questions mostly and didn't want to explain it. But Arthur gave the game away pretty much with the novel and with his subsequent book called The Lost Worlds of 2001, which had all the stuff that had been cut out.
Yes. That's amazing. Mark, you have a follow-up if you're still with us? Continue.
Yeah, you mentioned Carl Sagan. You know, Carl Sagan went to the University of Chicago. They were studying nuclear physics, him and Stanton Friedman at the same time. Stan Friedman, you know who he became and what he went afterwards.
Yep.
So thank you very much, my friends.
Thank you, Mark, for your call. No, continue, Robert. That's interesting. Some people may not know all these different things about these particular people that our caller, Mark, from Arizona, was talking about. Fascinating stuff.
Stanton Friedman was was often seen on television in the 70s and 80s and 90s talking about UFOs and UAPs. And he was always billed as nuclear physicist. I have an interesting anecdote. Back in 1999, I published the Apollo 11 crew debriefing, and it hadn't been seen by the public. They'd been debriefed when they came back from the moon, and during that debrief, the subject of an unidentified object was seen by the Apollo 11 crew somewhere between the Earth and the moon. And they had, when asked about it later, they had denied it, and particularly Buzz had denied it. And there it was in the debriefing. And I was reading this right after it was declassified and handed to me to publish it. And shortly thereafter, I put the book out, and it caused quite a storm of interest because there it was, right there in their own words, that they had seen this object. And shortly after I put it out, I got a phone call, and somebody in my office said, Rob, there's a fellow called Stanton Friedman on the phone.
Wow.
And so I picked the phone up, and he said, do you know who I am? And I said, yeah, I know who you are. I've seen you on the TV a lot. And he said, I want to know how you got hold of that Apollo 11 debrief. How on earth did you get that? We've been trying to get our hands on that for decades. And I said, I asked for it. And they just gave
that easy, huh?
And he didn't quite believe me, but it was true. I just asked them. I said, do you have a debrief of the crew? And they said, yeah. I said, can I have a copy of it? They said, no, it's classified. And I said, oh, okay. And then 3 weeks later, they phoned me back and said, if we declassify it, could you get it published in time for the 30th anniversary? And I said, sure. And then they handed it over to me.
That's an amazing story. And we had many interviews with Stanton, and I was with him at some of the UFO conventions, and I do, not that I'm claiming any, special story here or any special title, but I had one of the last interviews, though on my iPhone with him, just before he sadly passed away. A very interesting man. We've followed him for many years, as you're describing here. One who I consider to be one of the greats who was trying to get out the truth. So I got to ask you this question, because I'm sure so many people will want to know this from your side. Why the heck have we not been told, and it sounds stupid to some, the real truth behind this UFO phenomenon? I mean, all the evidence that's never a piece of metal in your hand, never a body. What do you feel is going on here? What's the cover?
Certainly, if I knew the whole story, Steve, I'd be famous, sure, wouldn't I?
You would be very famous. But in this with this particular powerhouse radio station, you may yet become that very quickly by whatever you tell us.
My feeling is that, there's things have happened that people just generally can't explain, whether it was in the 40s or the 50s. As technology evolves, we see things that we don't understand because there are things that are kept secret.
Correct.
And obviously, a lot of it's to do with defense technology, whether you believe it's stuff that we ourselves have concocted or it's something that was captured. There are things flying in the sky today, right now, that certainly we're not being told about because they're important to national defense and national security. So, we're always going to have these things flying about that we don't know what they are, whether it's the Aurora spy plane or the SR-71 back in the 70s or the X-15 or whatever. I personally think that, we'll never be ahead of that curve. There's always going to be something that we can't explain, and people will tend to jump to conclusions one way or the other.
Well, Robert, it's funny you mentioned the SR-71, and I'll make an announcement here to the radio station and the listeners and the show, the Dr. Sky Experience. A good friend of ours is retired from the 9th Strategic Reconnaissance Wing from Beale Air Force Base. He himself, Colonel Rich Graham, flew the SR-71, has many books out. He's become a friend. So he's mentioned to me over time he will get together with him, as we're doing with you proudly, to talk about what it's like to fly that particular aircraft, which is at least many people believe pushed at least to Mach 3.1 or 2, and to the genius of Ben Rich and Mr. Kelly Johnson. That is a whole other story.
Yeah, it's
Robert,
an amazing thing.
I'm going to shift gears on you really quickly here. Most people, as they're listening to this, probably would be amazed. I'm amazed. Now, hopefully they will too, that you have a very deep music background. Also, opening up your own record label, Griffin Music. You're obviously put out so many releases for different rock and roll acts, some others like Motorhead, Thin Lizzy, Mike Oldfield, Olivia Newton-John, David Bowie, but you are probably the go-to guy from what I'm reading here on the story of Led Zeppelin. Talk about that for a minute. That is amazing.
Well, yeah, you mentioned at the beginning that I'd been to see them perform in 1975. I was a big fan before that. I actually bought their first album the week after I think it came out because my brother was a Yardbirds fan, and that was the precursor to Led Zeppelin. Yeah. But when I went to concerts in the early 70s, I think the very first concert I went to was Pink Floyd, and they did Dark Side of the Moon a year before it came out. So that was a good start. But seeing Led Zeppelin in person in 75 was such a jaw-dropping experience. I went out of my way to find out everything I could about them, and I started collecting all their records and newspaper articles and posters and God knows what else, and ended up writing, 5 or 6 books about them.
That's incredible. I mean, the story, obviously, we want to concentrate on your ability to do, as you're doing, an excellent job describing this epic movie, which is obviously something that everybody should see. And we don't really give homework here on the Dr. Sky Experience, but Robert, I think it's a good idea to say to everybody listening far and wide, the power of the station. If you haven't seen it, spend a few moments, meaning a few hours. And the good part of it is in the theater, at least it had an intermission. And many people were objecting when they went to see the recent movie about, of course, the building of the atomic bomb, that it did not have, an intermission. So if you watch the old film, right, it has a showing of intermission, but you really need an intermission for a long movie like that. So everybody, if you haven't seen it, take Robert's advice and mine. I think it's well worth your time.
Get the 4K Blu-ray. It's extraordinary. Oh, really? Absolutely extraordinary.
Wow. So let's go to our caller, and forgive me for forgetting the name here. Let's go to Philadelphia. You're on with Robert Godwin as we continue to move through time and space. Good morning there. How are you?
Gentlemen, awesome show. And Carl Sagan, when I hear that name, I think of billions and billions. But this show is...
Just like the federal deficit, which is trillions and trillions.
Right. He said some far-out things through the years, Carl Sagan. But
excuse me for interrupting. What is your name? And I apologize. What is your name?
Oh, John.
Okay, John, could you do us a favor? We're coming up on another break here, so I want to hold you over. Just stay with us, John, because everybody's important that's calling in here. We'll be right back on the Dr. Sky Experience with great stories from not only Robert Godwin, but our special callers. We'll be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Hi, this is Hugh Downs. You're listening to Dr. Sky on aviation and space and life.
46 minutes after the hour, we continue here to the top of the hour, of course. Our special guest is Robert Godwin. He is involved in the ownership of cgpublishing.com. And now, John in Philadelphia, it's your turn to be heard on the Dr. Sky Experience. Sorry there, we didn't get you a fair chance. So your question or comment?
Great. It's the first time I've ever come back from a commercial, and it was hold on. But the thing is,
yes.
The show is awesome. We know aeronautics, space, exploring is very important. And through the years, we've had so many different things break through. And we talk about, like, the Gemini program, Apollo program, space aliens, UFOs. Do you guys realize that the space aliens do not come to America, the United States, because they would be subject to the 65 Immigration Act? They would not be allowed to come here unless they were processed. Now, I know the AM signal. The AM signal goes all over the world, guys. And
that's where this signal's going right now, John. Yeah. No, that's an interesting way to wake us up on this early morning. Well, Robert, you can take that one, I think, tongue in cheek, right there,
John. To comment on that, I have to remind your listeners that I'm in Canada. So,
okay. Well, John, listen, I thank you for calling, and you're giving us another different angle on what's going on with alien technology and those visitors from space. I hope you'll call again. And appreciate some of what you're telling us there. So many people, of course, they learn things, mysteries of the universe. Let's now go to Sandra in New Jersey. Good morning, Sandra. You're on the Dr. Sky Experience. How are you?
Oh, good morning, Dr. Sky. How am I? I am okay. I want to ask you, how can I become interested in all this when I'm not? But I'm open-minded, and I love to learn, and I like to broaden my horizons. So how do I become interested in all this stuff if this is the last thing I think about? I don't believe there are people up there. I mean, I need to be educated on all this, and I want to.
Well, Sandra, I really appreciate you, and believe me, people like yourself that are talking about this, maybe listening to this for the first time. All we're trying to do here, and saying it proudly, with no objection here and no apology, trying to open our minds about things that we don't normally talk about. So here's my homework, Sandra. If you take this the way I'm saying it, go to a place like cgpublishing.com. Why? Because this gentleman, Robert Godwin, has so many wonderful books on how the space program took place. And all I can say on the other side, and give Robert a chance to respond here, just continue to listen to our show, because I'm hoping that the message is getting out. We're getting a little more, Robert? Education. It's not about the host, Sandra. It's always about the great guests. So you get the last word, and I want Robert to jump in on it.
Okay, the only thing I was interested in was when I learned those astronauts were in space for much longer than they planned, and I wondered how do they get all their food. And then someone said there's this store up in space that they go to. Is that true, or is that not true?
Robert, you have the floor.
No, Sandra, what happened was they were not planning on staying up there as long as they did, but once their spacecraft had a problem, they were told to stay put on the space station. Now, the space station is already equipped to handle, I think, as many as 12 people, and I think there was only half a dozen up there at the time. And they resupply that space station with unmanned spacecraft that are sent up both from the United States and from Russia, carrying supplies, food, water, fuel, oxygen, all the things that they need to stay alive. And so they always have a supply of stuff there anyway. And it was no particular stress on the system because they have what they call multiple redundancy, where they always plan for the worst and hope for the best.
That's exactly right. You know, Sandra, the mainstream, the legacy media in this case gets this thing so wrong, or got it so wrong. The word stranded, right, Robert, kept coming up in every news briefing and everything you'd read. And everybody out there who's not necessarily tuned into the space side thinks, oh my gosh, these poor people up there. You know, how can they live? Are they going to die up there? Far from it. They're Naval Academy graduates, Sandra. They're very well trained. And as Robert said, there was much provisions, even though they stretched it a little bit. You know, the sleeping environment wasn't probably the best. But Sandra, I appreciate you calling, and hopefully you're learning something, as we all are, with the great guests we have on the Dr. Sky Experience.
Well, I'm going to keep listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandra.
Appreciate that.
Bye-bye.
Good morning to you. We're going to come up on a break here, a very short one in a moment or two, but I just wanted to ask you, talk about cgpublishing.com. It's just as I mentioned to Sandra, this is amazing, the things that you have there. And you bet it's a plug for you, because over the years, I've read so many of your books and used it as source material for what I'm trying to do. Please tell us.
Well, thank you for the plug during the last call as well, Steve. I've been doing this since 1984 was when I published and wrote my first book. And since then, I've done about maybe 300 books, something like that. The space aspect of it was started in 1998 when I was fortunate to have dinner with astronaut Buzz Aldrin. Mm-hmm. And Buzz asked me what I did for a living, and I said, I'm a writer and publisher. And he said, hey, you can do me a favor. I said, what's that? He said, could you get a book done in time for the 30th anniversary of the first flight round the moon? And I just said yes, without even thinking about it, and subsequently did that for that event and was invited to the event, got to meet the astronauts. And at the end of the night, Buzz said to me, there's another anniversary coming up in 3 months. And I got the point. So
yes, it's the start of a whole series.
I'm still doing it.
Well, blessings to you, my friend. It's just incredible because, and again, seriously, folks, if you go to libraries, you'll see many of his books there. But obviously, when you want to learn about the history, I mean, we don't have time, obviously, to go through every particle of this or participating thing. But when you go back to Mercury, Gemini, all these stories, we've had many on other shows that I've been doing for years. Great astronaut guests that talk about this. And it's amazing, the early pioneers to space, as you talk about in your book, so cgpublishing.com. Folks, we're coming up to a short break here. We'll be right back here on the Dr. Sky Experience. Where? On Talk Radio 77 WABC.
This is the Dr. Sky Experience. Always look to the sky. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Moving to the top of the hour, ladies and gentlemen, let's go and see how many callers we can get in to the top of this hour. We say good morning to Tony in Clifton, and you'll have to be very brief here, but good morning to you, sir.
Hi, Dr. Sky. How are you? I just wanted to say that one of the things that I believe is really an issue when they share information about aliens is the microorganisms and how they've been handled. I think that government sort of, whatever they know, they may not have handled properly, because when you look at all the movies, there's always this big issue of protecting yourself, decontaminating, etc. I think that's a big reason why we don't know everything, because things weren't always done properly. And, you know, we'll see if they've tweaked it, because I think one day or another it's going to happen that we're going to have to contend with them and be prepared. If we weren't prepared for a pandemic, and I'll leave it at this, Dr. Sky, if we weren't prepared for a pandemic, I don't think we were ever prepared for aliens. And hopefully in this century we'll get it both right.
Tony, it's amazing. You bring up some very interesting points here, and I hope you'll continue, as I know you have in the past, being part of our show and join this family of the Dr. Sky Experience. Robert, a quick comment from you. I hate to use quick because time, of course, in the time-space continuum.
The only time that we've ever really made any effort to do that was with the first moon landing, and the Apollo 11 astronauts were put through decontamination procedures that lasted about 2 weeks, because they were concerned that there was a very remote possibility that there might be lunar microbes. As it turned out, there wasn't, and the only illness that came from that procedure was the doctor got an allergy to moon dust. So that was about the only time they did that. After that, with Apollo 12 onwards, they didn't bother with it anymore.
Thank you, Tony in Clifton. Appreciate your time here. And Carl in New York, obviously you're holding on here. If you want to continue to hold on, we'll do our best to go into hour number 2. But I want to give you the last word, which is literally like less than a minute. Thank you, Robert Godwin. What say you?
Oh, well, it's been great being on with you again, Steve. I appreciate it, and I love answering the questions from your listeners. As far as the book is concerned, we were talking about the heritage and legacy of the Space Odyssey. It's in its 8th edition now, and as you pointed out, it's available from cgpublishing.com, and it covers the whole history of space movies and television shows from 1902 right up to the present day.
Robert, I consider you a friend, and obviously over the years we've talked a lot, but now expanding, as I'm privileged and honored to be expanding this with the Dr. Sky Experience here on Talk Radio 77 WABC. We'll be in touch soon. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for hour number 2 as we reintroduce, Dr. Andrew Farnsworth. He's talking about something as a professor and a doctor in the subject of ornithology, bird migration part 2, just on the other side of this new hour.
At Capella University, you can learn at your own pace with our FlexPath learning format. Take 1 or 2 courses at a time and complete as many as you can in a 12-week billing session. With FlexPath, you can even finish the bachelor's degree you started in 22 months for $20,000. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu. Fastest 25% of students. Cost varies by pace, transfer credits, and other factors. Fees apply.
Vitamin Water was born in New York because New Yorkers wanted more. Like more flavor to go with all the flavor. A refreshing drink after climbing 6 flights of stairs to a walk-up apartment, or standing in the subway station in 100-degree heat. Focus when I have an 8-hour shift. And XXX after I was out all night at a club. Call XXX. Drink Vitamin Water. It's from New York.
You're the perfect blend of elegance and style, and your ride should be no different. The 2024 Hyundai Sonata Hybrid meets all your needs, from business to brunch and everywhere in between. With head-turning details like a sleek front end, plus stylish interior, and an available 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster and seamless tech integration. Okay, Hyundai. Visit HyundaiUSA.com to learn more about the new 2024 Hyundai Sonata Hybrid.
This episode is brought to you by PetSmart. Stop by for Yappy Hour with your pet at PetSmart. Save $5 on walk-in grooming services like nail trims, ear cleaning, brushing, and more. No appointment needed every weekday from 2 to 6 p.m. And while you're there, Yappy Hour includes exclusive in-store deals like 25% off pet toys. Visit services.petsmart.com/grooming to learn more.
Always look to the sky. The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
And at 4 minutes after the hour, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for hour number 2 of our expanded hours with the Dr. Sky Experience as we move into, for many parts of the nation, early on your Sunday morning, and probably still evening, or who knows what time it is, with the broadcast signal of this radio station. 173 countries, and that's amazing. All 50 states, and what? We're sure, even out to the cosmos. So if you're out there, give us a call at 1-800-848-9222. And as I mentioned before, in the beginning of the first hour, you have an email that you'd like to send me. Of course, I respond to all. It's just drsky@wabcradio.com. And if you pass this show on to many people and say, hey, I heard something that I really like on that particular radio station, and we're talking about things that are kind of mysteries, some of the things that open up our minds. Yes, the Dr. Sky Experience podcast. You can hear this show as a repeat, and also other information that we put up there at Red Apple Audio Networks and WABCRadio.com. Ladies and gentlemen, another week has gone by, and as we move into our weekend deeply, last week we had another fascinating guest, Dr. Andrew Farnsworth. He was talking with us about the most fascinating thing I can think of, about these creatures on Earth that have wings. Imagine if we did and we could fly. An amazing story. Andrew Farnsworth is a visiting scientist in the Center for Avian Population Studies at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Andrew began birding at age 5 and quickly developed his long-standing fascinations with bird migration. His current research applies technology, including weather surveillance, radar, audio and video recording, and monitoring tools, citizen science data sets, and machine learning techniques to study bird movements and their relation to the physical, biological, and anthropogenic environments. He's kind enough to be up very early this morning. Dr. Farnsworth, thank you for round 2 with us. How are you this morning, sir?
I'm well. Thank you for having me, Steve. Nice to be back.
No, it's amazing. And one of the stories that I'm reading, and you, of course, know so much more about this, in continuance to our bird migration story, and if you haven't heard the first edition, ladies and gentlemen, there will be some repeats on this, but I'm reading all over, Dr. Farnsworth, that bird migration is in full swing. There are some, according to this birdcast.info website, 83.1 million birds in flight all across where? Not just the Earth, maybe just North America? Define this to us, because this is fascinating.
Yeah, so birdcast.info is a project I've been working with for a long time, and what we're seeing actually tonight as we're on the air, just over 360 million birds are aloft over the U.S. right now.
Say that number again, please. Repeat that number.
Big number, 360 million.
So maybe, Doctor, that's almost like a bird for every citizen of the United States almost, right?
That's right. It's almost staggering to think about, if
That's
we moved
amazing.
everyone in the U.S. at one time on one night. That's what we'd be talking about.
So I read, and tell me if this is, well, everything I read I don't always believe, but in this one on the internet it said there was a gigantic, massive swarm of birds over the state of Georgia moving northward as we talk about this. But are there any other particular areas? Because I'm sure people out there listening in the far reach that this station has, would there be any areas that if people go out, in a certain time of day or night, that they might be able to see more of these as they group in the sky?
Yeah, for sure. Right now, the most intense migration, literally as we're talking, is happening over the southern Great Plains. And, it's obviously it's a little difficult to experience these migrations when they're happening at night, which is when most bird migration happens. However, you can hear birds as they're moving over. And, of course, the next day after they've migrated, if you take yourself to lots of different kinds of habitats. For example, in the Great Plains, any place where there's vegetation that's sort of not ag land, along streams, wetlands, etc., you'll find lots of birds. So it's pretty clear there are connections. You can experience it in different ways. It just depends sort of what you're interested in. You can find a way to do it. It really, the other interesting thing is you don't have to be necessarily in one particular spot in the U.S. Sure, tonight, the Southern Great Plains is the hot spot, but Central Park in New York, some of the Chicago wilderness, other spots, yes, in Georgia and the Southern Appalachians, lots of spots to visit where you will see and hear birds and experience migration.
Doctor, from a humanist, the human side of this equation, your fascination with birds begins, as I'm reading here, at age 5. Talk a little bit more about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I think most kids are interested in the world around them. They tend to be very observant and maybe a little bit less or more distracted, depending on how you look at it. I was very fortunate to grow up in a green suburb of New York in Westchester County in Rye, New York, and there were binoculars in the house. There was a field guide. My grandfather was a scientist. He was a chemist, but he had a great fascination with just all things science. And so the binoculars sitting around and this field guide, a Roger Tory Peterson guide to birds of the eastern United States, that was just like it was just a wonderful pair of tools to sort of capture attention, and then to actually see some of the birds that were in the field guide, going outside.
Oh, beautiful!
It just nailed it.
Well, it's interesting. I'm fascinated by this because I said before in our last show that we did last week, it would be amazing, wouldn't it, if people could fly? Imagine seeing traffic jams of people flying along different corridors that they'd be in. The FAA, it might drive the FAA crazy, but going back on a serious note, Icarus tried it, and obviously his wings were made of wax. So the ability to fly, let's talk about flight for a second, because it has so much to do with aircraft. And obviously aircraft are what? Modern day versions in the mechanical side, the metal version of birds and how they fly. Describe how birds do fly. This is interesting.
Yeah, well, think about for a little bit the adaptations to do it, and especially the things that we as humans don't have and have tried to recreate, right? Obviously, you need some way to lift a pretty significant amount of weight if you're a human. So one option is how do you minimize that weight? Well, for birds, they have very, very light bones generally, and what looks like something that might be very heavy is in fact much, much lighter than you would think. So they eliminate some weight, right? And obviously we see that with aircraft and other things where it's easier to fly. Sure, okay. Next thing is obviously you need some kind of a combination of mechanisms to keep you powered and in flight aloft. And birds have these incredible adaptations in feathers that are particularly valuable. These locking mechanisms that basically, if you sort of imagine like locking your fingers together and then pushing that through the air or the water when you're swimming, the same thing applies to birds in flight. So it gives them this incredible ability to actually move forward, right, and also fine-tune those movements incredibly. And so to make the best of, sort of this challenging, medium that they need to move through, they're light, they have these incredibly strong interlocking feathers, and then they have tremendous control over those feathers in terms of the aerodynamics. Same as if you're sitting, by the window in a plane and you watch a plane, landing, for example, and you see all this movement in the wing of various flaps and ailerons and, adjustments that the plane is making. That's just a very, very simple version of what birds are doing, probably hundreds or thousands of times in a moment when they're working with feathers. So these incredible,
it's amazing.
Ways.
It's amazing. 1-800-848-9222, 1-800-848-9222, which obviously stands for WABC. Dr. Andrew Farnsworth is here. We're talking about many subjects in ornithology, that is the study of birds, deeply. And this particular guest, a wonderful guest, as he's here our second time. We had him here last week because the conversation cannot be contained in 1 hour. No way at all, as many of these conversations. But I wanted to say something. Today in our home here in Arizona, I was sitting out by the pool, and I'm looking out to a beautiful blue sky when it'll change over the next few days. But what I'm seeing is this animal, a bird, I should say, that's flying. It must be some kind of hawk, but describe this. You've all seen them, folks. They just take the currents, and the bird is just flying around and around, and it's not flapping its wings much, so it knows the power of gliding. And describe this. It's amazing.
Yeah, so this is a very different feature, right, than talking about powered flight and flapping. So birds like you're probably describing a turkey vulture, but it may be a number of other species, too, of soaring birds. Most people will recognize them as hawks, birds that are active by day and that are using thermals, rising columns of air, to move around, to gain altitude, to stream off the thermals and sort of move quickly and then find another thermal, very much like a good glider pilot, sort of looking for ways to gain elevation. These birds are masters of this. And the cool thing about turkey vulture, you think about watching one of these birds fly. So turkey vulture, yes, they do a lot of soaring. They also do a lot of teetering on their wings. So they sort of, if you can imagine them sort of rocking back and forth as they're flying, these kinds of patterns that you see with birds flying and soaring like this, these were inspirations to the early aerialists, in particular the Wright brothers and others that recognized that they needed to make some pretty serious adjustments, right, to their structures so that they were flexible, right, and that they could bend and that they could move. And that was okay, that it didn't have to be something extremely rigid, that in fact it needed to move in order to get a plane aloft and to do things. So, sort of taking the cue from some different kinds of birds. Turkey vultures are a really good example of that.
I want you to describe something in the geologic time period here. As we know, the Earth has gone through many mass extinctions, not just the asteroidal impact as we talk about. But describe from your knowledge of ornithology, when would you calculate in time? What was the first bird like? I mean, I'm sure callers out there or people interested to call in would probably want to know about that.
Well, I think about, let's go back something on the order of, 60 to 70 million years to something like Archaeopteryx, right? This bird-like dinosaur that had feathers, among a number of other different, types of dinosaurs that seem to have evolved these feathers, right, from scales, just sort of down that reptilian line. And over the course of, let's say, the next, 20 to 30 million years, you have two patterns happening. Obviously, yes, major changes on the planet to the numbers of animals after asteroids and volcanism. And these changes, aside from, miniaturizing and, say, for the reptiles and the bird types, more and different kinds of feathers and movements around the planet and the ability to exploit all of these, interesting and cool and extensive new habitats with changes in climate, you start to see some of the first birds that look similar to what you see today. Some water birds, long-legged heron types and wading birds.
Yeah, we see them around lakes. Right. Beautiful.
Yeah, that's right. Also, you start to see some of the first, birds that are sort of more chicken-like, right? And some of the birds that are very tall and sort of striking, like what we call the ratites, like ostriches and emus and things like that. And so you have this incredible diversity happening that it's hard to know. Does it mirror what we see today of the 10 or 11,000 species that are on the planet? Well, it could have been more, for sure. But the kinds of birds that you see around today were starting to be present, in the last tens of millions of years in many different ways in many different places around the planet. So you can go pretty far back and see things and sort of conceive, oh, the birds I'm seeing today, their ancestors, deep in, tens of millions of years back, looked very similar to what we see today. And obviously, you get to a point where, okay, you look back in the fossil record and you see something that looks rather distinct and a little odd, like, for example, Archaeopteryx or any of those, sort of feathered dinosaurs. But still, they're very bird-like in structure. So this is a long-standing kind of pattern that we see in the evolution of these species and these kinds of organisms.
Well, from the other side, people who are listening all around the world, I'm sure, there's obviously a conversation we can have much later in this particular interview about the pigeon, because look at what it's done in world wars and things like that, as homing and delivering messages. That's a fascinating subject. But help me out if I say the word wrong. You're the expert on this. The dinosaur-type bird, was it called a pterosaurus? Am I correct in saying that? Is that big flying?
Yeah, the pterosaurs, that's right.
Yeah, that's fascinating because I have a friend who's big. Get a load of this, Doctor. He's big into the RC world, and I can't believe what I saw. He developed a life-size, I guess whatever the dimensions were, which was pretty big, of a radio-controlled pterosaurus. And you know what? That thing got him in trouble because a lot of people didn't see it as an airplane. They thought we were being invaded by a prehistoric bird, but it's fascinating. It's just amazing.
This thing was very big, for sure. I mean, you're talking an enormous wingspan, much bigger than the biggest birds. I mean, certainly into the realm of small aircraft. So I'm not surprised he got in trouble for that.
Are there birds that you can tell us about? And I want people to jump in on this because there's always room here, folks, for you with your questions and comments. 1-800-848-9222, your questions, and let's hopefully stay on measure with the subject about this whole story of birds migration, ornithology, the study of birds. Our special guest, Dr. Andrew Farnsworth. He, of course, is the visiting scientist, Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Who better to talk to about this? But it's so fascinating to have you here about this, and I want to save till the next half hour part of the show, the top of the hour as we move to, that whole story of how these birds migrate, because that, to me, just blows the lid off this whole very subject. So it's interesting when we talk about these. Let's talk about the pigeon for a minute. This is fascinating because it's a shame, in my opinion, that if people look down on this particular species of bird, think again, because hopefully at the end of this interview, we're going to learn so much more that they do serve a purpose. And I know people might be going, yeah, what purpose do they serve? Doctor, they obviously have been delivering messages and saved a lot of lives in the course of American history and other histories.
Yeah, pigeons are pretty incredible. I mean, it is such a common occurrence now in particular in cities, New York City especially, but others as well, to see pigeons. And people kind of write them off as they call them sky rats or whatever, some derogatory thing, But pigeons they're pretty exceptional. I mean, you think back to over the last, let's say, thousands of years. All right, these pigeons that we see in New York City, they originated from a wild stock called rock pigeons, and these are birds that formerly bred only in very remote environments, cliffs on ocean sides, really jagged mountainous areas. And these are birds that were really domesticated number of times over, to the point that now they are, commensals of humans that are just ubiquitous. And they are incredible in that, I mean, as many birds have the ability to do, pigeons also can sense the magnetic field. They can use, solar cues. They can do visual, navigation and orientation, and they can combine all these things. And that's just a little bit that we know about them. They happen to be good study specimens, obviously, too, because we know how to breed them and keep them in captivity and can understand quite a lot about them because of it. So they may seem sort of like, I'm really tired of seeing pigeons around, but they're quite exceptional.
They are. And again, if you folks read the history of this, I mean, I've read many books on this. We've had, like yourself, Doctor, experts in the field of talking about how messages were delivered, which I still don't understand. I mean, what are they using? Dead reckoning? Is that the way that you would describe it? They memorize different parts of the terrain like you'd have on a Google map or something? How do they do that, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's a little bit different than dead reckoning. It actually is information. So some of it, depending on exactly what they're doing, we were talking last week about racing pigeons, right? And that oftentimes they'll circle their coop. They gather information about where they are based on the magnetic field that they're experiencing, but also what they see visually. And of course, some of that is also informed by what they experience as they're, after they've hatched. And so there's information there about where they are. And then, of course, when you remove them from where they are and take them 100, 500, 1,000 miles away, they have an ability with the combination of magnetic field and the ability to orient, and then also have some understanding about when they're getting back to, the place they started. It's more than dead reckoning. It actually is true, orientation and navigation using information around them. That's a combination of things. That is certainly the magnetic field, but it's also visual, and it's integrating a whole lot of information.
Yeah, you say it so well. I mean, obviously, great guest here. And, ladies and gentlemen, this is fascinating because in the next portion of the radio show after the hard break, we're going to talk more about the specifics of what the good doctor can tell us about how these amazing animals, birds, do navigate, and it has a lot to do here with a lot of things on the Earth that are going on right now as far as the magnetic field of the Earth. A couple of things as our news stories that I'm talking about right now. We're hearing, Doctor, as I'm reading this off the Internet, Colorado bird migration is now in a decline, and they don't specify in this article which species, I guess, is talking about, but what would you say to that about the declining migration? Is it something to do with something that they're eating, something that people are doing, birds flying into windows? What would you say?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a little bit of all of those. The declines have actually been really dramatic. Colorado is not the only place. There was a study that came out, and actually a follow-up to it that was just published very recently, literally last week, that talks about an enormous number of birds in terms of population declines over the last 50 years. And it does relate to changes, conversion and loss of habitat. It also does relate to birds colliding with buildings. There are other sources of pollution, obviously. There are a lot of hazards. Our human infrastructure is extensive, obviously, across the planet, and that has impacts. Birds are very sensitive to their environments. The canary in the coal mine euphemism is real. It's a true situation, right? And because they are very sensitive to changes, as many animals are, but birds happen to be sensitive and ubiquitous and easy for us to see. So, yeah, these declines are real. They're serious, and it's a deep concern because, of course, when you start to mess with the structure of these ecosystems in which birds participate, right, and their integral components, the ecosystem change. Birds, they occupy, depending on what species they are, all these different types of services in the system, right? Whether it's pollination or scavenging or dispersal of seeds and fruit. These are important elements of keeping these ecosystems together. So this is one of the reasons we're really concerned about these population declines. And it isn't every single bird, but it's many, many species for sure.
No, you say it so well. And for the environmental impact here, we talk about wind power, whether people like it or not. The problematic thing as we go to the bottom of the hour here in just a few moments, this is a very serious thing for what? Bird migration. How many birds are actually killed, if that's a fair statement, by this gigantic wind farms that are out there? I mean, this is a concern, right?
The turbines, birds do collide with any structure in the atmosphere that rises up into the atmosphere for sure. Wind turbines are actually not a leading cause. It's buildings and windows that are the leading cause by far. Orders of magnitude more mortality at those structures than at the turbines. In essence, the kinds of facades that are reflective and transparent that have glass, those are the things that are the serious issues when it comes to birds colliding. That's like 30 birds a second in the U.S. I mean, that's amazing. The staggering number, more than 1 billion every year in those kinds of collisions. Well,
I'm glad you qualified that because here we go again, folks. We get great guests to qualify these type things and people who study this with their expertise. I'm reading all over the place, and if I didn't have you here, I would think that wind turbines, the giant blades that you see on the highway that look like they're 300 feet long, that is not, in your opinion, once again, not a leading cause for bird mortality, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's a much, much lower number than what happens in our collisions with buildings, with our structures, homes, skyscrapers alike.
An Associated Press article that I'm reading here off the internet states that lights out in certain locations for bird migration. What say you? Is that going to help them? I would imagine if the lights were on, wouldn't that be a help? Or tell us more about why they're doing the lights out.
The lights out is super helpful. Along with this glass issue that I was just talking about, light pollution is a huge impact for birds because, as I was mentioning, most birds migrate at night, and obviously they have these incredible sensory cues where they can see stars and navigate and orient by them, but also the magnetic field. Light interferes with that badly, right? So it disorients and it attracts birds. And what it ends up doing is, of course, you think about where lighted and illuminated infrastructure is. There are lots of things that are solid, including glass in those areas. So it draws birds into those areas and they collide. So the light glass combo is a really dangerous one for the nocturnal migrators.
Well, in the next half hour, what I'd like to get into in specifics, and we do see the callers calling in here, like Foxy from Westchester and other callers in the queue, we will do our very best to answer your questions or have you state your comments here on this particular radio show. But what's interesting is, as we go to the bottom of the hour, our very special guest is Dr. Andrew Farnsworth. He is, of course, the sitting scientist, Cornell Lab of Ornithology. He's here to talk about many subjects, about those amazing creatures, birds, the ability to fly, something that you and I do not have that capability yet. We use machines to do it, mimicking bird flight. Such a fascinating story. Here on the Dr. Sky Experience, we're on Talk Radio 77, WABC, with your calls here at 1-800-848-9222. We'll be right back.
A station built just for you. Entertaining talk, information, and New York opinions.
Shut up!
The world famous and American original. Talk Radio 77 WABC and WABC.
This episode is brought to you by Temptations Cat Treats. Your cat will come running for the perfectly irresistible Temptations Creamy Puree and Temptations Lickable Spoon Cat Treats. The best time to feed lickable cat treats to your cat is anytime. Feed by hand for a playful moment, in a bowl for a creamy treat, or as a topper to make mealtime fun. Visit TemptationsTreats.com to learn more.
Here at the Almond Joy Factory, where tropical vibes abound, we use soft, fresh-tasting coconut.
The crunchiest almonds and delicious chocolate candy.
Ah, but do you know what our most important ingredient is? Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
Almond Joy's got nuts and something even way better than that. Yes, Almond Joy is made with almonds and joy.
Are your business expenses playing hide and seek? With Uber for Business, the small spends that slip through the cracks, like rides and meals, go right where you need them. Because it integrates with leading expense platforms, you can say goodbye to surprise costs, missing dollars, or chasing receipts. Everything's track downable. Uber for Business. Make small steps that make a big impact. Learn more at uber.com/small steps.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This is the Dr. Sky Experience. Always look to the sky. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
The Dr. Sky Experience in our extended version, and we're privileged and honored to have you with us. Equally impressive to have our special guest, Dr. Andrew Farnsworth. He is the sitting scientist at Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And we're discussing in this particular segment, ladies and gentlemen, how do birds navigate? This to me is so fascinating. We could never finish the story in our last week's edition. But let's go to the callers right now, patiently waiting on the line. Let's say good morning to Foxy from Westchester. Are you with us? And good morning. How are you today?
Hi, gentlemen. Great show. Very interesting. And Dr. Sky, so happy to have you aboard. You are fantastic.
Well, thank you for your comment.
You forever.
Thank you.
Okay. I've got a 5-year-old I'd like to get started since the doctor said he started at age 5. What does he suggest and how did he get started? What did he do? What books did he read? What did he have binoculars? What did he do at age 5?
Good question. Thank you, Foxy. Stay with us because I want to give you an opportunity to respond back. Doctor, that's a great one.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for your question, Foxy. So, yeah, when I was 5, yes, a pair of binoculars. It does not, binoculars can be expensive. It does not have to be an expensive pair. Binoculars, and there are a couple of great field guides. A colleague of mine named David Sibley has a field guide that's been out for a number of years that I think is particularly great because the illustrations are so wonderful, in addition to a lot of good information. But that combination of if you're in the New York area, using an Eastern field guide for the Eastern U.S. and a pair of binoculars will go a long way. But so also will going to any of your local parks, whether it's in Westchester County or going to Central Park to, let's say, an American Museum of Natural History field walk, going on a guided walk with a birder, with somebody who knows about birds and can show birds, is one of the best things for young birders, young people that want to be interested or are interested. That mentorship, the passage of knowledge, from somebody that knows, kids, they assimilate that stuff very quickly. So that the combination of those three things is really important. And just a couple quick Googles, will get you sort of those answers. But that's absolutely what I would recommend for sure, a pair of binoculars and a book. But then also, being able to connect with somebody directly in the area that's leading bird walks. And these things happen every weekend throughout the year.
That's amazing.
There always are birds around. Yeah, for sure.
So, Foxy, isn't that amazing and informative and actually fun? I mean, this is a great thing to talk about because we see birds all the time, right, Foxy? And hardly, Doctor, he pays attention. We should. And here we go. You get the last word, Foxy. Thanks.
Okay, yeah. And I'm just thinking, we got to get our kids outside with nature, get off the computer and all that. And I think this would be a fantastic way. Okay, guys, keep up the good work. And
thanks,
Dr.
Foxy.
Sky, I want you there forever. Okay, thanks. Have a great night.
You're
great
so
show.
kind. Have a good Sunday. Let's now, after that, wow, it's hard to come down, Dr. Andrew Farnsworth. That's pretty cool. But no, I always say this, it's always the guest, not the host, ladies and gentlemen. Let's say good morning to Brian from Valley Stream. You're on with Dr. Andrew Farnsworth. How are you this morning?
Yes, Dr. Sky, I appreciate you. You're great with anyway, my question was with the windmills being built off the coast, especially in Long Island, they were trying to build some. Would that have an adverse effect to a lot of birds flying with those windmills being built?
Really good question, Brian. Thank you for asking that. So there's quite a lot of study going into that right now. And yeah, there are places where, sure, you can cite them where there are going to be more potential impacts to birds. But it looks like right now, and the research is ongoing, that if you do a couple of key things, that it's going to make the impacts of these sorts of things much, much less. One of them, as I was mentioning before, is lighting them, right? So they have to be illuminated for aviation and the FAA to make the turbines visible. But blinking lights and actually having as little lighting as possible, that's one of the things that reduces the impact of these things. And so, too, does just the operation, sort of timing the maintenance, which does have to happen on these turbines, fairly regularly. Timing it to times when we know there are large numbers of birds in the area, which we can forecast quite well at this point. Both of those things minimize the impacts. The impacts aren't huge anyway, just yet. They could be bad if we operated them sort of willy-nilly or really without, any science guiding it. But we have the ability to make that stuff as smart as possible. So my hope is that we will do that and minimize any of the small impacts that are out there. We'll see, but that's the plan.
Yes, Brian.
There's a future to develop the windmills without hurting the birds?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, the industry is increasingly sensitive to it, and that it could be a concern that, for example, if you put a turbine in a place where there are going to be large numbers of birds, that may maximize the chances of them colliding, but that you can be smart about first sighting them and don't have to be in places where there are lots of birds. And then second, operating them in a way that minimizes those impacts. So yes, it is on the table. It is a known thing in terms of the industry, and they're working on it. And I have faith that it's going to be something that comes together to be beneficial and not have the sort of scary impacts that you kind of hear about as possible.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay.
I appreciate you and all the callers here, as we all learn something here by talking about this and listening, which is also a very good part of learning. Thank you so much. Let's say good morning now to Detective Nolan in New York City. And Detective, good morning to you on Sunday in the New York area. I kind of owe you an explanation that we're not ready to do, but we will get a guest. I know you called us last night during this particular episode of the Dr. Sky Experience on talking about what happens in space with the bones. So we're going to go out and find a guest. How about that? Good morning, Detective.
Good morning. Thank you for that, Dr. Sky. I'll be waiting for that reply. But my question tonight is regarding robins and how they obtain food for their young. I noticed that after storms, they walk the lawn and they stop and then turn their heads and then pick up an insect. Is it auditory or visual?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you for asking it, Detective. So there's a little bit of both. There's certainly an auditory component as they're getting close and sort of recognizing what's around them. But there's this combination of visual and auditory, right? So worms that are close to the surface, especially after rain, you think about sensitivity. I mean, even humans, we have sensitive hearing. We hear little things here and there. In the bird sensory world, their capabilities, they kind of align with what we can do as humans, but they have a sort of a resolution, if you will, to hear noises quite a bit better than we do. So that combination of sort of cocking the head to hear and then sort of targeting, okay, that's the place where the worm is. And then using the sort of unique vision that they have. Obviously, they have eyes kind of on either side of their head. It's a little different than with humans. That combined with the hearing to kind of localize, this is exactly where I put my bill into the soil to grab this worm. And it's very successful. They're pretty incredible at it, I have to say.
That is amazing.
Great question.
Detective, you get the last word. Go ahead, sir.
Truly amazing that a robin can hear a worm moving in the soil. Yeah. I find that impressive. That
is totally amazing. Thank you for joining us, Detective, and many callers out there that I'm sure would like to get involved in our conversation with these special guests.
This is exactly where I put my bill into
So thank you so much. Doctor, let's move on here because I know we're almost up against another break here, a short one. But let's talk about the navigation of how birds do navigate. And I'm reading some of this here, and we need your help on this. Apparently, from what I'm reading here, the magnetic field of the Earth is so much a part of the bird navigation, but something in their eye, let's say even the pigeon, maybe a certain chemical that aligns to give them, imagine seeing this like you'd see a visual screen, like a heads-up display on an airplane or an aircraft. This is quite amazing. So how do birds simply navigate when we're talking the magnetic field?
Yeah, so this is interesting. So one of the things to remember is the interesting thing about this discussion is that birds they're using their magnetic sensors to orient, and that allows them to position their bodies in a way that then they can navigate from point A to point B, right? So sort of the orientation piece comes first when it comes to the magnetic sense, and it does appear, and it's ongoing research. This is something that really has evolved only in the last 15 or 20 years in terms of our understanding of it, that there are molecules in birds' eyes, and basically proteins, that are activated by the magnetic field and that orient in a particular direction as a function of that magnetic field. So when birds are growing up in their nests, when they're exploring for the first time their habitats around their nests, when they are migrating, they're getting information about the magnetic field that allows them to orient to it in a particular direction, and to learn from that, right? So it's a combination of innate and learned patterns here. But that molecule, that structure in the eye is absolutely critical because it does respond to the magnetic field of the Earth and basically allows them to orient to this. It's fascinating, and it's something that it's pretty novel research. I mean, it really is quite cutting edge, and there is not total agreement on exactly how it works.
You're so right.
Sort of, it's definitely an ongoing. Let's call it a hypothesis to test that looks like it's developing into a really nice theory and some data. But we're still not 100% there yet, but that's what it looks like.
Well, they're talking, and you know so much about this, a thing called a cluster N in the bird's brain that actually has a receptor area in which they can perceive this and also aid it along to see the magnetic field. Imagine if you and I, as we're driving down the road, would have an eye like the Terminator had, where it could look at visual distances, all kinds of things. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's never discount the beautiful creature on the earth, which we call the bird. Obviously, that would be a disrespect to you, Doctor, and so many people out there that love the bird as a pet, or as you see the different birds out there that are migrating. What was the number again, Doctor, before we go to the break? How many, according to birdcast.info, which we recommend people go to after the show?
Yeah, so tonight we're right at about 360 million right now over the United States. Big number.
That's incredible. Well, I hope they're flying safely and hope aircraft. I mean, that also is another subject where you see, potential air crashes by bird ingestion into some of these engines. That also could be a problem, but let's be positive. And let's now go to that break right now here on Talk Radio 77 WABC with the Dr. Sky Experience as we move toward the top of the hour. We'll be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Hi, this is Shirley McLean. I am having a wonderful time talking to Dr. Sky. Since I've spent a lot of my time looking up, I love to discuss what is underneath. And always remember to keep your eyes to the sky.
I'm your night bird, Dr. Sky, soaring high above you and the nation, here on the highway to the heavens. As we continue, ladies and gentlemen, with the Dr. Sky Experience, if you're a native New Yorker, you may remember the voice of a young lady, a beautiful voice. Her name was Allison Steele from WNEW-FM, and she proclaimed herself as the night bird. It's hard for me to compare, but we're doing everything we can to provide information on the great subjects of astronomy, space, aviation, and weather. Ladies and gentlemen, we continue with Dr. Andrew Farnsworth describing to us the many mechanisms in which birds fly. Some of these things sound like science fiction, Doctor, but it is amazing. Your research continues. Nobody really understands it then, as that's what I'm hearing.
There is a lot we still need to learn, for sure. So, I mean, one of the ways I think about this, obviously we each know how sensitive we are to our world, right? And we know the extent of our hearing and our sight and our smell. And, we can sort of assign, like, how good am I at seeing and can I see things far away, whatever. And that creates this kind of sensory experience that we have. We don't even have, I think, even close to a complete clue for how many animals are perceiving their world. There's so much information that they're taking in, and guaranteed they're using all kinds of different ways to do it. So, yeah, we're learning things. I mean, literally, it's like every week there's something new. It's a fascinating and dynamic field for sure.
Well, Dr. Farnsworth, I should have included you in what I had as the opening statement to this new segment. I claim that I'm a night bird, but how about you and I are the night birds? Because we are literally doing this during the night. How about that?
Allison's deal was great, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember her when I was in high school, and I know it's another time and another, total universe, but she was just amazing doing that as the night bird. Let's go to Rich in New Jersey. Good morning, Rich. You're on with Dr. Andrew Farnsworth. Your question or comment?
Yeah. Hi, Doctor. Are you guys familiar with the purple martin? I have them on my dock. They fly up every year. I'm told they fly up from the Amazon, and they have their babies here because if they have them in the Amazon, their eggs are eaten by the snakes down there.
Yeah. So purple martins are amazing. That's great that you have them, and you have a martin house probably that they live in. They're incredible. They're for the listeners. These are swallows. They're actually quite large swallows, and they actually do an incredible job of eating a tremendous number of mosquitoes, like hundreds and hundreds of pounds of mosquitoes every day. And these birds do migrate from, let's say, New Jersey into the Amazon. They spend the winter there, right? And one of the reasons that we see birds breeding in places, say, like New Jersey, as opposed to the Amazon, there are predators around for sure. And some of the early, the ancestors of these martins, they certainly dealt with predation pressures in the Amazon, both from snakes and other reptiles, but also from other birds and so on. And so the evolution of migration is, there's some component of that deals with kind of removing those stresses on an organism and allowing it to, in this case, have a lot more offspring in New Jersey than would be possible in the Amazon in a safer way for that organism. So, it's a very cool system for sure. Great.
Isn't that interesting, Rich? That's amazing.
Oh, unbelievable. These people, they're here now. They just got here about 2 weeks ago. And they actually send in lookouts before they take up in the gourds.
That's right.
Set out 2 or 3 lookouts over the gourds to make sure it's safe for the rest of them to come, and then they'll go get their friends, and then about 100 of them will show up out of nowhere.
Amazing story. Totally incredible. Yeah. Rich in New Jersey, thank you. Have a great Sunday. Hope you'll stay with us throughout the entire time and space here and join us again on the Dr. Sky Experience.
Very observant, Rich. Thank you.
You bet. That's a beautiful story. Doctor, how do people get in touch with you before the clock runs out? That's always important because you're always great to listen to, and I appreciate your time.
Sure. Well, email is great. af27@cornell.edu. That's about the best way. I'm not so, even though I study technology, I'm not so technologically advanced to be honest.
That's all right. You and I are kind of brothers, but give that email again in a slower version. Go ahead, sir.
For sure. Yeah. af27@cornell.edu. A as in Apple, F as in Frank, and then the number 27@cornell.edu. Yeah.
No, Doctor, that's fascinating. I'm going to jump back to the astronomy side of the equation here and get your comment. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, we try to give you information on what's visible in the heavens. Right now, Doctor, this most massive sunspot of the entire year 2025 is on the visible disk of the sun. It's called active region 4079. So if people go to a thing like spaceweather.com, you can safely look at it. But here's what I want to say. It's 87,000 miles long. It could be flaring up, doing X-flares, and those are pretty nasty. So the question I ask for you in a few moments, how much do these solar flares and CMEs really have, if we have any measurable way to tell, toward the migration of birds if the magnetic field is induced with all this energy from the sun? What say you?
That's a great question. And some colleagues just started to kind of attack that question in the last couple of years. Literally, there was a study published by some colleagues that looked at exactly this phenomenon, and it does impact migration for sure. Thankfully, even the X-class flares, it does not seem like it is so dramatic an impulse to these birds as to make them go haywire. It's not like we're seeing, suddenly birds reverse. But it does impact them, and some of the impacts, I think the biggest impacts include just kind of likely what's something akin to confusion, right? It's a lot of information. So birds will slow migrations. They may not take off on a particular night. It depends on the timing of when the solar storms hit. But it definitely impacts them for sure. It's just kind of like, think of it as, an enormous amount of interference. I mean, I don't know, maybe a Carrington event would be different.
You're right.
We haven't had anything like that for quite a while, obviously. But,
we have not.
But these X-flare types, some of the strong ones, they definitely impact the way birds behave. It just doesn't look like it's so extreme yet, anyway, that it's anything other than sort of a pause in migration or just a subtle delay. Yeah, that could translate into a problem for sure. You never know, but it does not seem to be very dramatic. But it does impact them for sure.
No, it's interesting. And I just want to let people know that the active region 4079, people who have those solar glasses from the eclipse, I just did this the other day, as it evolved from the left edge of the sun. It's visible, but obviously don't stare at the sun. Even when the sun is low, you could still damage your eyes. But that's an interesting thing because it's about 50% the size of the Carrington event in 1859 as far as a size sunspot. So keep your fingers crossed, folks, that it doesn't blow out a massive X-flare because it's in line of sight right now, and that could happen, not to be alarmist. But this is fascinating, our conversation that we're having with you right now. So birdcast.info, I mean, that's great. I'm looking at the images right now. And the other day, that whole area of massive migration to the north was lit up yellow. It was amazing, right over the southeastern part of the United States. So navigate to us in case people are not able to see that. Where is the most activity right now if you look at localization for the migration?
Yeah. So right at the moment, the southern Great Plains, sort of thinking about Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, that's the hot area right as we're speaking, right? And so, right now there are probably, of the 360 million birds that are aloft right now over the U.S., most of them are in that area for sure.
Well, if each one of them could be adopted, that would be amazing. That's almost like I said, not to be repetitive. The number of people in the United States, closely maybe matches, maybe by 10 million or so. But how about this one, Doctor, on a lighter note? If an Arctic tern was a car and your trade-in value on it, since the Arctic tern, as I'm reading, travels 44,000 miles a year, imagine that if you had a 3-year-old Arctic tern, it would go for 44,000 times 3. The trade-in value would be minimal, but thank goodness the Arctic tern is not a car, right?
That wouldn't be a good lease deal for sure.
You got to have a little humor in some of this too. See, that's what's great about you and a few other good scientists, because we want to hear a little bit of lighthearted stuff with the good stuff, because not everybody has the PhD. Obviously, God bless you, in the discussion that we're having. But don't you think a little humor sometimes goes a long way?
For sure. That engages a really important part of, the creativity and just being excited about what you do. It's like,
you're awesome. And we're going to talk more about this as time goes on. I'm sure the interest level of the audience has pretty much proven itself. But here's something very interesting. Can you tell us in quick synopsis, maybe in a minute or so, is there a bird or species that does not have wings? I think there is such a bird on the earth. Describe that have no ability to fly.
Well, there are definitely birds that don't fly. So penguins obviously are one good set. They have wings, but they don't use them to fly, right? They sort of move underwater. There are some other birds too, actually, quite a number, surprisingly. And that flightlessness has evolved a number of times. There's a cormorant in the Galapagos. There are kiwis in New Zealand. There are ducks in Argentina called steamer ducks. And, in the right habitat and the right space, having wings doesn't necessarily, require flight.
That's amazing. Yeah, the whole species is fascinating. I just picked up a book, and don't laugh, folks, at the Goodwill. It's a textbook called Ornithology. Why did I do it, Doctor? Because we had you as a guest and have you as a guest. I'm going to study up, but I'll be light years behind you, but I'll be positive as I learn more about birds. A fascinating subject. Thank you for your time. I hope we do it again, and thank you for being a night bird with us during this early Sunday morning for you. And a hello and thank you to all the listeners around the nation and around the world. Thank you so much, Dr. Farnsworth. We'll have you back.
Thank you for having me again. I look forward to the future.
Always a pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, this show would not be possible without the man behind the curtain. And I want to give a big shout out to Bill. I like to describe it in a more poetic way. He's our helmsman on this powerhouse starship that we call a radio station, Talk Radio 77 WABC, as it moves out deep into the cosmos. I'm honored to be part of this station. I grew up in the New York area, lived in Hackensack, New Jersey, and every morning I would look out my window when I was about 12 years old and see this big tower that sat down in Lodi, New Jersey, obviously still standing tall, where this big signal, I'm sure, is being sent out into space. Thank you, Bill, for your production skills, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll do it again as we move on next Friday evening, midnight, into Saturday, 2 a.m., and then on Saturday night, midnight, into 2 a.m. Sunday with the Dr. Sky Experience. Email me at drsky, Dr. Sky, at WABC Radio. Safe travels, good morning, and God bless America.